NUS Alice, who was 16 at the time, would never forget the events of 1977 in Colorado Springs. For several months, she had been babysitting for her neighbor, Mrs. Carter. The kids, Tommy, 6, and Lily, 8, were remarkably well behaved. They both went to bed quietly without making a fuss. The task seemed simple, just a couple of hours of watching to prevent any mishaps, like an accidental fire, and some cash in her pocket. However, that night, February 7th, started routinely but ended so dramatically that the memories still haunt Alice to this day. Mrs. Carter lived in the same apartment complex as Alice's family, just a few doors down. As a single mother, she always looked exhausted, rushing off to her night shift at the local diner. She had found Alice through an ad she posted at the community center. Reliable teen babysitter, $2 an hour. The woman liked that the girl lived nearby and didn't charge high rates. That evening, Mrs. Carter kissed Tommy and Lily. Goodbye handed Alice a $5 bill and instructed, "I'll be back by midnight. Lock the door, Alice." The girl nodded, already flipping through channels on the old TV. The apartment was a modest one, cluttered with toys and piles of unwashed laundry. The children, dressed in pajamas, were curled up on the sofa. Alice picked up a Dr. Seuss book, their favorite story with bright illustrations and funny rhymes, and read aloud until the little one's eyelids drooped. By 8:30, they were sound asleep. She carefully carried them to their beds, went around the rooms checking the windows, and locked the front door, following her usual routine. A peaceful silence settled, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional noise of passing cars. Settling on the couch with a bag of chips, Alice turned on a light-hearted comedy, turning the sound down to a whisper so as not to disturb the children. Around 9 in the evening, a suspicious noise occurred. A light thud, as if something had slipped in the kitchen. Alice froze, her hand with a chip paused at her lips. The apartment was on the first floor, and the kitchen window faced directly onto the parking lot. She tried to convince herself it was nothing. Maybe a stray cat had jumped onto the windowsill or the wind had stirred the trash. But her pulse quickened. Her heart pounded. She grabbed the phone, an antique rotary dial, and moved it closer. There were no cell phones back then, just a cord that barely reached the couch. Taking a deep breath, she tiptoed into the kitchen and flicked on the light. Empty. The window was locked. The sink was clean. Alice chuckled at her own fear, feeling foolish, and returned to the screen. Soon after, there was another sound, a sharp scraping, as if metal scratched against glass. It came from the back door, which led to a narrow patio. Alice turned off the TV, listening in the darkness. The children were still sleeping peacefully in their room. From behind the door, she could hear Tommy's soft snoring, reassuring in its ordinariness. Barefoot, in socks, she moved silently to the door, where the linoleum gently cushioned underfoot. There was a small window in the door, covered by a thin curtain. Pulling it aside a centimeter, Alice peered out. The patio was shrouded in gloom. The nearest street lamp was too far away to dispel the shadows. But in the corner, behind the glass, something stirred. Or was it just her imagination? Her stomach clenched. She pulled the handle the lock held firm. Stepping back, she was already mentally dialing her mother's number. But then she heard footsteps, not outside, but inside the apartment. Heavy, measured, they echoed from the hallway near the children's room. Alice darted to the kitchen drawer and grabbed a knife. Her hands were shaking, and the blade nearly slipped. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Silence, only another step in response. With the knife at the ready, breathing raggedly, she moved down the hallway. The door to the children's room remained ajar, as it should, but the air suddenly felt thick, filled with the sensation of being watched. Pushing the door open, Alice burst inside. Tommy and Lily were sound asleep in their beds. Relief washed over her, her knees buckling. However, a shadow lurked in the corner, tall, static, like a sentinel. The girl froze. The knife fell from her sweaty hand. "Go away," she said more firmly, trying to sound confident. The shadow didn't flinch. Turning on the lamp, Alice expected to see emptiness, the product of her overactive imagination, the weariness of a long evening. But no, a man in his 20s stood by the children's dresser, tall, with tousled hair and the piercing gaze of dark eyes. He stared directly at her. A knife gleamed in his fist, far more imposing than her own, reflecting the light from the bulb. Alice screamed, recoiling. The stranger was silent, only taking a step forward. In a panic, she lunged for the front door, her fingers slipping on the lock, wet with sweat. Behind her, his boots thudded, heavy and relentless. Finally, the door swung open, and Alice burst into the parking lot, screaming for help into the cold night. A light flashed on in a neighboring apartment window. Someone shouted, "Call the police!" Barefoot, not feeling the asphalt burning her feet with frost, she ran on until she burst into her own apartment. Her father had already run outside, sensing something was wrong from the noise. He dragged his daughter inside, held her close, and dialed 911. The police arrived quickly. After inspecting the scene, they stated that the man had fled, the back door forced open with a tool. The children had slept through everything safe and sound. Thankfully, blood was found on Alice's pajamas, not her own, but smeared in haste when she brushed against the wall. Detectives collected samples along with fingerprints from the door. It later turned out to be William Kernan, a local college student who knew Mrs. Carter. He had often appeared in the complex, loitering aimlessly. He was not arrested that night. He had long since melted into the darkness. Decades later, in 2024, Alice stumbled upon a news story. The case was finally resolved. DNA from that blood perfectly matched the profile of Kernan, who died in 2010. Full verification was impossible. The body had been cremated, and there were no relatives left, but investigators had no doubt of his involvement. That same evening, he had stabbed a 14-year-old girl named Maria Hansel in a neighboring apartment. She, like Alice, was working as a babysitter and did not survive. Still, in her nightmares, Alice sees his eyes, icy, bottomless. After the incident, she refused to babysit again, never set foot in that complex again. At times, she wonders how close she came to the edge, to becoming just a line in a police report or a newspaper chronicle. She started babysitting for the Millers when she was 12. By 15, it had become a routine. Walk a couple of blocks, watch their 6-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter get paid, and go home. The children were rambunctious, completely messy, and devious in the ugliest ways. However, the money she earned allowed her to buy necessary school supplies and save up for a used bicycle. That Friday evening, Mrs. Miller said that she and her husband would be back around 11. Nothing unusual, she said, shrugging on her coat. The girl nodded, mentally planning get the kids to bed by 9, finish her homework at their kitchen table, and be in her own bed before midnight. By 8:30, the house was quiet. The single lamp on the floor lamp softly illuminated the living room. Cartoons played at low volume. Rain drummed against the wide front window, and from time to time, headlights swept across the curtains, casting shadows. The children, exhausted from an hour of wild games, were curled up on the couch, wrapped in blankets up to their chins. She clutched the remote to instantly mute any intrusive commercials that could wake them. 9 o'clock passed. She decided to give them an extra 10 minutes before carrying them upstairs. Getting up, she stretched and headed to the thermostat to turn up the heat slightly. And at that moment, everything changed. A dull thud at the front door, massive, decisive, nothing like the crack of a broken branch or a gust of wind. The lampshade vibrated slightly. A second blow sounded muffled, as if someone was pressing their ear against the panel. Her heart pounded. She looked at the children. Their eyes were now wide with fear. Pressing a finger to her lips, she whispered, "Hide behind the couch, not a sound." They obeyed silently, a feat for those restless kids, and scurried under the knitted blanket. She turned off the TV and the lamp. The room was plunged into darkness, broken only by the flickering numbers on the cable receiver. In this sudden silence, the sound of the rain intensified, but she still caught the commotion at the entrance, the rustle of soles on the mat. She pulled the phone out of her pocket. Not a single bar of signal. Their home network often acted up during thunderstorms, so contacting anyone was impossible. Backing towards the kitchen, she yanked open a drawer by the sink and grabbed the largest steak knife, the one she had washed earlier after heating up store-bought pizza for the kids. She tried to even out her breathing, creeping along the wall to the hallway leading to the door. In this rickety house, every inch of parquet betrayed her presence, so she leaned on her heels first, muffling any possible creaks. Halfway there was a new noise, the click of the mail slot, which opened and slammed shut. Someone outside was probing vulnerabilities, probably looking for a weak spot in the lock. The thought of escaping through the back door with the children flashed through her mind, but the backyard had no fence and backed onto a dense, dark grove. If the stranger went around the building, they would be trapped in the open. The decision to face the threat inside, where she knew the layout, seemed more reasonable. With the phone clutched in her left hand and the knife in her right, she turned the corner and raised the blade to shoulder level. Her pulse was pounding in her temples so fiercely that she could barely hear the front door swing open. 2 tall figures burst inside, waving their arms, their mouths agape. Boo! For a moment, her mind refused to recognize those faces. Then a flash of lightning lit up the window behind them, and she made out Mr. and Mrs. Miller, their wet coats glistening with water. They burst into laughter, doubled over, and patting each other on the shoulders. Her scream caught in her throat. Her breath caught. The tip of the knife trembled inches from Mr. Miller's chest. He straightened up, noticed the blade, and his cheerful grin faded. "Hey, take it easy," he said, raising his hands as if facing the barrel of a police revolver. Mrs. Miller wiped tears from her cheeks, still giggling. "We were checking if you'd be brave," she explained. "Looks like you passed the test with flying colors." She lowered the knife, but horror gave way to anger. Her knees buckled. You risked your lives, she breathed. Mr. Miller waved his hand. All for fun. We came back early, wanted to test your mettle. He turned away to hang up his coat. Put the kids to bed, okay? We're hungry. We'll make grilled cheese. She stood frozen, waiting for at least an apology or permission to leave. But the couple simply walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and began clattering dishes. She returned to the living room, still trembling. The children emerged from their hiding place, stunned. She told them that their parents were back and dragged the 6-year-old upstairs, the 8-year-old trailing behind. Putting them to bed was awkward. They sensed her confusion. She kept her tone even and concise. Good night. Your parents are downstairs. Turning off the light in the hallway, she still clutched the knife. Returning it to the drawer, she washed the blade clean of fingerprints and wiped it thoroughly. From the corner of the hallway through the kitchen doorway, she saw the adults. They stood by the stove, embracing, swaying in time, and laughing at some family joke, spreading butter on bread. The aroma of melting cheese wafted through the house, but her stomach only clenched. She sat down at the dining table, placing her phone face down. No one offered her a snack. No one expressed gratitude for her restraint in not stabbing Mr. Miller in the ribs. By 10:30, Mrs. Miller finally paid attention to her. You can go, she chirped. Standard pay. The girl walked home in the pouring rain, the money folded in half in her pocket, her boots squishing through puddles. That night, she lay in her room staring at the ceiling, replaying in her mind the moment the door swung open, the flash of lightning, the glint of the knife, Mr. Miller's dark, wet coat like a silhouette from a police procedural. She realized how close she had been to turning her fate and their lives upside down with one instinctive movement. She realized that her own life and the lives of their children hung by a thread. The girl also realized that the parents were completely indifferent to her distress. This prank served only their personal entertainment. Since then, she no longer agreed to look after their offspring. When Mrs. Miller sent a message 2 weeks later, the girl replied that she was busy with schoolwork. After that, the invitations stopped. In the evenings, heading to the bus stop, she sometimes passed their porch. From the outside, the house seemed quiet. Ordinary warm yellow light shone through the windows. Toys littered the lawn. However, the chilling rush of horror they had caused for fun flashed in her memory. This incident taught her 2 important lessons. Panic feels as acute as a real threat, and some adults remain eternally immature. Now she carefully checks every door she enters, including her own. Her phone is always charged and ready, and if someone brings up a harmless joke built on someone else's embarrassment, she remembers the trembling knife in her hand and shakes her head firmly. No, the girl never particularly believed in ghosts, but after babysitting at the Thompsons' house, her certainty wavered. It was an ordinary-looking cottage at the end of Willow Street, right across from St. Mary's Church in her quiet, provincial town. The girl's mother worked as a kindergarten teacher and knew the Thompsons' sons, Ethan and Liam, well from her classes. Mrs. Thompson had called her one evening last summer because their regular babysitter had suddenly cancelled. She was 17, needed the money, and figured it was an easy gig. How wrong she was. The evening started uneventfully. Ethan and Liam, 6 and 8 years old respectively, turned out to be charming but restless scamps running around their dilapidated two-story house. It was a typical house built in the 70s, with creaking wooden floors and a faint, musty smell, as if permeated with all the decades it had lived through. Mrs. Thompson left a clear list of tasks: feed the boys, oversee hygiene, and put them to bed by 9 in the evening. Nothing complicated. At 6:30, she was in the kitchen with them, preparing dinner. The boys insisted on tacos, so they were taking ingredients out of the refrigerator. Liam slammed a plastic container of store-bought salsa onto the table. She turned around for the cheese, and suddenly the container exploded. Sauce splattered everywhere, on the walls, cabinets, refrigerator, creating a scene reminiscent of a bloody massacre. The boys shrieked, a mixture of laughter and fright. The girl froze, clutching a piece of cheddar tightly, in complete amazement. She assumed the salsa was old, maybe fermented and built up gas. That's how she calmed herself, grabbing a roll of paper towels and starting to clean. The children helped, giggling nervously, but Ethan kept glancing towards the living room, as if anticipating someone's arrival. It took them a good 20 minutes to wipe up all the mess, and the pungent tomato smell stubbornly lingered. They were still wiping remnants off the refrigerator when a sharp crash came from the living room, as if something massive had collapsed. She told the boys not to move and headed there, her heartbeat accelerating. 2 photo frames, one with a picture of the boys on the beach, the other with the parents at their wedding ceremony, had fallen off the walls opposite each other. Both lay on the carpet, the glass intact, face up, as if they had been carefully placed on purpose. She inspected the walls. The nails were in place, no cracks or damage. The windows were locked, no draft. Ethan, who had followed her despite the ban, whispered, "This happens sometimes." She forced a smile, leaned the frames against the wall, and didn't put them back. Her stomach churned, but she kept telling herself it was just the quirks of an old house. After the meal, it was time for bathing. She herded the boys upstairs, drew a bath, and let them splash around while she stood in the hallway, leaving the bathroom door slightly ajar. Their father's office was across the hall, a cramped room with a cluttered desk and an antiquated desktop computer. As she leaned against the wall, scrolling through her phone feed, there was a soft, tinkling sound, followed by another. The monitor came to life, its fans whirring loudly. The screen lit up with a blue light, displaying the Windows login window. She froze. No one had touched the device. The children were splashing in the bath, and she kept her distance from the desk. Peeking into the office, she expected to find a cat or a random object on the keyboard, but the room was empty. The mouse was motionless, the keyboard covered in a thin layer of dust. The girl attributed it to an automatic update, but after the salsa and frame incidents, it seemed ominous. She yanked the monitor's power cord and hurried back to the hallway. By 9:15, she had put Ethan and Liam to bed in their shared bedroom on the 2nd floor. They were exhausted and instantly fell asleep, their steady snores filling the space. She closed the door and went down to the living room to wait for the Thompsons to return. Flipping through channels on their bulky, ancient TV, she suddenly caught it. Footsteps, measured and heavy, shuffling down the upper hallway. She muted the sound, her pulse quickening, decided the boys had woken up. She tiptoed up the creaking stairs. The bedroom door was closed. Opening it slightly, she saw that they were sleeping soundly, as before. The hallway was deserted, the air still. She went around the other rooms, the guest room, the bathroom, the office, all empty. Goosebumps ran down her skin as she returned downstairs. 10 minutes later, the creaking resumed, now quieter and slower, as if an invisible figure was pacing from one end of the hallway to the other. She didn't dare go up again. She huddled in the corner of the sofa, texting her boyfriend about her growing fear. "Just relax," he replied. "Old houses always have lots of noises." But she didn't buy it. She sat clutching her phone, mentally counting down the minutes until 10:30. When the Thompsons finally returned, she tried to act casual, but she must have given away her anxiety because Mrs. Thompson asked if everything was okay. The girl mumbled that the boys had behaved perfectly and hurried to grab her coat. She didn't mention the salsa, the frames, the computer, or the footsteps. She just wanted to leave as soon as possible. On the way home, she thought about Ethan's whisper. This happens sometimes. She babysat them a couple more times, but never stayed late, and always brought a friend with her. To this day, she doesn't understand what exactly was going on in that house, but it clearly wasn't her imagination. The place exuded something wrong, and the memory of it is forever etched in her memory.